Okay, good morning, everybody. In our series of Cornwall Chamber of Commerce online events, I'm delighted this morning to welcome Martin Crump, who's long been a member and a fan of Cornwall Chamber of Commerce. Worked with his consultancy over many years, and Martin used to be on our board. So we've worked closely, and I think that this crisis and the sort of different ways that we're learning to work here have been very much on Martin's radar for a while, and I'm therefore delighted to welcome Martin to this event this morning, where we can really have another look at what this might change in working patterns as we go forward. Whatever happens from this crisis, it's going to change business behaviours and life behaviours in ways that previous recessions and hiccups to business haven't done. So I think we need to take account of the amount of pain and worry and concern that businesses have got, but also start to look at where that might change the way we can look at ourselves as individuals, ourselves as reacting and interacting with the workplace, and where we learn from this to go forward. And I think there are, as I've said on various LinkedIn pieces and other media recently, ways in which Cornwall long-term could be a winner in this scenario for those of us that can see through this awful, troubling time that we're seeing at the moment. And I don't want to underplay that. In the working party group that I'm on with Cornwall Council and the LEP, the respondents to the survey, 92% of businesses have said it is having a significant impact on their business. And it demonstrates, I think, that survey, what a hand-to-mouth existence running a small business is. Something like 40% of respondents have not got enough cash reserves to last them more than 3 months. So we do need to take some serious business actions alongside the more concern for oneself and one's well-being as well. But I think that it is a troubling time. We're all learning to work from home remotely, and the dangers of inactivity and loneliness that might bring. So I'm really delighted to welcome you, Martin, this morning, and looking forward to your insight on these matters. We've had quite a few questions in advance, but I do urge anybody listening now to add your questions as Martin talks, and then we'll try and address those in a Q&A session. One of the things I like about these live webinars is we've got time to do some real justice. We hopefully won't just skim over the top. We'll come into some specific actions that you can take in your circumstances. So without further ado from me, Martin, the floor is all yours. Thank you and welcome, and we look forward to hearing your insight, and I look forward to some good banter on the Q&A after you've spoken.
Thanks, Kim. Good morning, and it's good to talk to you. You're absolutely right. It is unprecedented times, and all of these kind of words have been used, crisis, pandemic, over the last few weeks. And I'm interested in the figures that Kim was just giving there in terms of the amount of cash reserves that small businesses around Cornwall have got, and we're definitely in that scenario. And this year was going to be our best year. We had set really high targets for this year. We'd already sold 50% of those targets by the end of February, and then everything disappeared by the middle of March. Literally everything. So we're in that same situation, and like lots and lots of small businesses, we've fallen through all of the cracks you could possibly imagine, being based in an innovation centre, being a small limited company, my wife's cafe closing down, having only had a week's trading, and so we're in that kind of same situation. And I've been talking to lots of my clients around the UK just to see what they're doing to kind of cope with this at the moment. And there is an awful lot of working from home. One of my clients in Plymouth employs 600 people, and they furlough 200 people, and 400 of them are working from home. And out of those 400, the company had to source and set all the security up and everything of 300 laptops in less than a week. So lots of organisations are reacting really, really quickly, which is great. And initially, that meant that people were able to continue the business that they needed to continue. And so, organisations, certainly my clients, are really having to find new ways of working very, very quickly. Some of them were moving towards that way of working and a more flexible approach to operations anyway. And as one client said, if I'd wanted, well, I did want to do this, but if I'd wanted to actually make it happen, I'd have had to put it to a committee. We'd have had to set up a subcommittee. We would have had to have a short-term working party. We'd have had to have consultations. And actually, we've got to where we wanted to be in a week, although we didn't want it to be for that reason. So I think what it's showing is the innovation and the flexibility and the quickness to react and problem solve that organizations managed to do 6 or 7 weeks ago. The problem with that is that it was a very quick change, and although structurally businesses might still be able to cope with it, what we're finding is that psychologically it's having a big effect, and that individuals working from home are having to balance their workload, their home load, and at the moment with kids at home and partners at home and so on, it's a very, very difficult situation for lots of individuals and lots of organisations. And I'm doing a lot of coaching with managers who are finding it difficult to manage team members at that kind of virtual distance. And they're finding it quite stressful because they feel out of control and out of touch with what's going on. There's got to be big levels of trust that are going throughout the organisation and so on. And most people are doing all right with this, but some aren't. And as Kim says, where we're at now is really where are we going to go with all of this? So the companies that are in survival mode are surviving. The ones who are finding it difficult are having to be innovative and having to think not just short term, but long term. I mean, I was reading a report yesterday that was saying that it's likely to be 18 months to 2 years before classroom-based training is going to be back to where it was beforehand because of social distancing and all of the issues around that. And from my point of view, that's really problematic because a lot of my business is based in that way. And also, I do a lot of European travel and travel into Ireland, and so that's stopped with clients as well. So I think the way that we're going to have to do things is really going to have to be different. And what we're seeing with the flexible working and the home working, I think, is a good sign for the future. I know at least 2 companies, talking to one yesterday, who were just about to sign the deal on 3,000 square meter office facilities, and are now thinking actually we only need 1,000 because we're going to work so much more flexibly from home and things. So, and another company in King's Cross, based in King's Cross, who employ 1,000 people in an office building there, whose lease is coming up this year, and they are not going to renew the lease. So they're going to have 1,000 people working remotely, and that's going to save huge amounts of overheads. But the potential problems around the psychology and the psychological contract and the way that people interact, which is going to lead to productivity problems, or could do, is huge as well. So it's not just about reacting and thinking, right, the future is going to be different, so let's react and make it different now. Let's plan for that and think about how we're going to do it, because working from home doesn't suit everybody. Some people really benefit from it, some people don't. I know one company where everyone's working from home apart from one person, because he's got a really difficult home life and so won't work from home. And actually thinking about that, for a lot of people, I guess work is a safe place, and it's somewhere during the day that they are safe for whatever reasons. So it's not just right, let's just all work from home now. I think when we come out of this stage of wherever we are, we've got to hit the ground running and plan for how we're going to do things more effectively. So that's kind of what I'm seeing at the moment. I know on a personal level, I'm going to be doing a lot more online. In fact, we're going to move almost primarily to online development. So we're working hard to put all the infrastructure and the marketing and all kinds of things in place for that. And it's quite exciting. But also it's something that I would have preferred not to have to do within a couple of months. I'd like to have had more time to plan for it. So I think that there are some great opportunities in moving forwards in the way that we work, but we need to be innovative and think and work differently.
Thanks, Martin. Well, those 10 minutes have been really insightful, and you've covered some really interesting headlines there. And I'm not shy in saying some of those things hadn't struck me. So we tend to think we're lucky in Cornwall having lovely space to go and exercise within a few yards of our home and that sort of thing. But of course, there's millions of people who haven't got that, and whom lockdown really does cause stress and strain. And it will be interesting to see what the reaction of people is when we're allowed out again, whether this new method of working, or how many people this new method of working suits, and how many people are just absolutely desperate and run around and meet people and hug people and those sort of things. Yeah. When we come out of it, really, and I think that's very insightful. One of the things which I've had to learn quite quickly about smart working is that actually when people are working remotely, you need to be more precise in your conversations about targets and expectations and that sort of thing. That is quite a good discipline that every business leader and manager probably should apply, and that's been an interesting one. How you treat everybody, because I've always believed as a leader that you need to treat people as they themselves want. Not everybody's the same, not everybody needs the same things. They all want different things. So it's really interesting that you highlight there that some people will actually be desperate to go into an office, whether that's for productivity reasons or sociability reasons. It varies from person to person, but it will be interesting to see how one, as a leader, and says to somebody, you can work from home for 90% of the time, you only need to come in for a team day or whatever, but you need to work in the office without stigmatizing them, without drawing attention to their difficult home life or whatever it might be, is a really sensitive area, isn't it, for a leader or a manager to come to grips with?
It is, and I'm finding all kinds of conversations that I'm having with leaders, and that leaders are having to have with their team. And we talk about productivity, and research has shown that when people work in an office all day, they're only actually productive for about 3 hours of the day, and the rest of the time is taken up with coffee breaks, social chats, discussions, meetings, and so on. And I'm finding that working from home, initially people were trying to work for 8 hours a day because they believed that when they were in work for 8 hours, they were productive for 8 hours, but of course they're not. And so people are hitting a burnout. And I've got a couple of clients I'm providing a certain number of hours coaching a month for, and there's a real peak in people at the moment who are just suffering from anxiety, they're stressed, they're really struggling. And it's not just about the fact that they're in lockdown, it's that they're overworking themselves. And so there's an initial productivity spike where people are working harder, but then it tails off because people aren't able to do it. And I think understanding that is really important from a leader's point of view. So being able to say to people, look, I only expect 3 hours of productivity, but as you were saying earlier on, we need to be more outcome and target based than having a kind of presenteeism approach to, it's not that you're here for 8 hours a day. This is what I want you to deliver today, and this is what I want you to deliver tomorrow. So it puts more pressure on leaders because they've got to be more specific and more able to plan, because it's kind of easy if the whole team are in an office and you need something due and you just go, oh, John, can you just do that for me? Whereas if they're at home all day, you have to be able to plan the workload and the team workload much more effectively as a leader, to make sure that people are delivering, because there's that element of people want to work but can't because they kind of burn out, or they run out of work to do because they finish it too quickly. So I think that the communication becomes really important. I'm finding that Zoom meetings or Skype meetings or whatever are more productive. I was talking to somebody yesterday who was saying they're finding that their meetings, they don't plan an hour for a meeting anymore, because it's easy to just plan an hour and just say, oh, we'll meet from 10 to 11. What they're doing is they're planning the meeting based on the outcomes. So the meeting might only last 20 minutes instead of sitting around and having a chat and a coffee and thinking about what we're going to talk about and going off topic and coming back on topic. They're much more focused. And so meetings are shorter because they're more productive.
Do human beings, or some human beings at least, need that off topic, that sort of discussing around the things? I've found it with myself that I've had some online meetings with people whom I really like, but there isn't the opportunity to have that sort of side chat or the catch up with the other news over a coffee beforehand or afterwards that you'd get sociability. I do wonder whether this online work, I know you've got side chats on Zoom and so on and so forth, but it's not quite the same as working that. So I think we are going to need to be careful that everybody is different, and some people will need those sort of off topic bits and the side chats and the sort of questioning ways of doing things in order to be actually more productive. As you say, perhaps 3 to 4 hours productivity a day is actually optimum productivity. The rest is sort of filling in the other human needs that we have, maybe. But really interesting things. Are there any sort of golden rules that people working at home should abide by? I mean, I know in the office we were always encouraged to sort of take a break at lunchtime, go and grab fresh air and that sort of thing. Has that sort of rules hardened at all for people working at home? I mean, I have been flat out on back-to-back Zoom meetings, but and yesterday literally did not leave my home office. I just couldn't even find time to go and get a sandwich. Now I know that's not very healthy, but I did feel that I got through a lot of work, and at the end of the day felt quite satisfied at 6 o'clock that I'd got through a lot of things with a lot of people, and they felt better even if I didn't feel better. And we had the meeting yesterday morning with the smart working team, and Ollie Thompson was talking about oxytocin, which comes from having done some good work or some good deeds for people. And I did feel sort of quite good at the end of the day, even though I'd felt sort of lost in the genuine sense. Are there some genuine universal guidelines that people should adhere to, Martin, when working from home?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would say one of the big things about this social isolation thing that we're going through at the moment is purely that, because one of the key elements of working is socialization, and we're missing that. And so there is that element of the little chat before a meeting, or bumping into somebody while you're making a coffee and having a conversation about the weekend and the kids. And missing that, I think, is really problematic. And one of the things I always really recommend is that if we're working in a virtual team, we need to have coffee breaks with people in the team. So we need to plan to, okay, so at 10 o'clock, let's meet for a coffee and we'll have a chat. Or 11 o'clock, let's meet for a coffee. So we need to have those regular breaks, and we need to have so you're splitting your day up into I don't know, let's say 45 minutes or an hour of work, and then 15 minutes of a break. And then, because if we're only productive for 3 hours, then splitting that 3 hours up through the day and planning it, I think, is really important. So taking breaks is critical. I know I'm doing a lot of online coaching at the moment, so I'll spend an hour with a client, and then I'll take the dog out into the garden for half an hour or 20 minutes, come back in, do something else, do some emails, go back into the next session. And I think it's discipline, really. That's the really important bit. We don't have the random social conversations. We need to plan them. Although I do know one company who they're all working from home, but they've got a second screen that has a Zoom meeting on all day with all of the team in it. So all of the team are there all day and accessible. So if you've got a question, you can just go, John, and they'll kind of click into the Zoom meeting that's going on and have a conversation. So then it becomes more spontaneous, and there's a bit of banter going around the office and things as well.
One of the things we learned from this is to keep those lines open all day, so you can have that sort of more spontaneous conversation. So before we close this part of the conversation, because I've got some other things to ask you about, is there one tip that people working from home can take from this part of the conversation, Martin? Is there one golden rule?
I would say there's a few golden rules, but the most important thing is to take breaks, and it's to psychologically separate activity. So one of the great things about working from home is that you can really improve your work-life balance, because if you take a break, well, which you should be doing, you can go and put some washing on, or, you know, the next 15-minute break while you're making a cup of tea, you can sort the dinner out. So instead of driving home for an hour and then having to do all of those things, when you you switch your laptop off at the end of the day, you're immediately into quality time. So I think that to me is the golden rule. But it's really about how you feel about that, because I was talking to one client yesterday or day before who said, yeah, she does that, but when she hangs the washing out, she has a phone with her in case somebody rings, because she's worried that if somebody phones her and she doesn't answer, that they might think that she's not working. And yet when she's in the office, when she goes to make a coffee, she doesn't take her phone with her. You know, so I think it is about a mindset. So for the golden rule for me is to be able to change your mindset from I'm working now to I'm on a break, I'm home, and then I'm working, I'm home. It's something I need to practice, I guess.
Yeah. So that's really interesting, I think, and I suppose then, you know, when you do finish work in the evening, use that freed up quality time which you've now created to do something which really satisfies your soul for the hour that you would normally have been commuting or putting the washing in if you've already done it. So really does grab some extra time, as you say. And you know, we've all been, for the last 25 years since we've all been connected all of the time on our phone or laptop, we've been complaining about, you know, the speed of life accelerating. And I think there's a really good moment to reset the dials and go, okay, we've found some time now, let's really use it. And that might take a bit of self-discipline and a bit of learning, actually, I think. But interesting. Now, one of the other things you mentioned in your talk was about how quickly businesses have had to move, you know, to buy 300 laptops, for example, or change procedures. And I think I've noticed that as well in government and local authority circles, that what would have taken months of red tape and planning and nobody putting their head above the parapet, suddenly we've seen things happen really quickly. And if you look at, you know, the furlough scheme at national level, or Cornwall Council getting those small business grants out at a local level, they've done that with the sort of alacrity which private sector would normally do it. I think there's possibly something to, without in any way wishing to be cavalier, although I confess as a small business, I've always liked to sort of get things done as quickly as possible. But without being cavalier, do you think we can all learn things about, again, using technology? Perhaps processes haven't really caught up with how technology can help us do things more quickly when required, and cut through some of the, I say red tape, that's a phrase overloaded with sort of negativity, but you know, the sort of processes which seem to stymie large business and the public sector. Do you think we perhaps could learn something from how we've gone about doing things in this crisis, and are there good things that we should hold on to as we come out of it?
Definitely. I mean, I think that it's a shame that it takes a crisis for people to react in the way that we have reacted. And, you know, people have talked about, I know that links back to the Second World War and the way we were able to change things so quickly then. And you know, and we're in that situation now. And my real fear of coming out of all of this is that we just revert back exactly to what we were doing before. And I think that'll be really difficult to do, because one of the great things about the length of this lockdown is that, you know, it takes 6 weeks to build a habit. And we've built a new habit in terms of the way that we're working, not just small businesses, but throughout the country. And even things like the way we interact socially. I mean, I've seen more of my children over the last 6 weeks than I did beforehand, because we're Facebooking, we're Zooming and so on. And same with my dad and so on. But I think that's at an individual family level. But I think we should be able to chunk that up to a national level so that we can react. And certainly within Cornwall, within the county, the problem is that now, not a problem, but we've demonstrated we can do things quickly if we want to. And I think what we need to do is want to do it in the future, and we need to want to react more quickly. There has to be the political will there. There's certainly the ability to do it. The technology is there to make it happen, and with the financial things now, with all of the electronic banking and all the rest of it, everything can be done really, really quickly. It's just there has to be the will to do it.
Well, I think that's absolutely right, and I said it. I put in my LinkedIn piece yesterday. Why would I, in the future, drive 3 hours to Bristol for a 2-hour meeting and back again with people that I already know? I accept it's a new client or a new relationship. You probably need to go and meet the first time. Once you've done that sort of long distance driving or whatever to go and meet people you already know and are comfortable with, I just can't see myself ever doing that again. This is really catapulted me into new ways of working from that point of view. So, there will be a freeing up of time again, won't there? So, there'd be interesting to see how we use that, whether for productivity, but I'm not just a board because I'm a Chamber of Commerce person for productivity. If it means more sociability or reading a decent book or learning a new hobby or something, then, it can be used for that as well. We might have that great, element of time recaptured for the first time in my working life, I think. Really. For the last 40 years, it's been accelerating, and time is seen as that thing which is at a huge premium.
That's really important. I was talking, but again, I've wanted to do online meetings a lot, and I'm sure there's lots of people who've kind of, particularly living in Cornwall, I'd much rather have an online meeting with somebody than drive to Bristol for half an hour and come back again. And I was talking to a client who is a management consultant, and he was saying the problem that he's had, because he had to travel all over the UK and Ireland every week, was that his customers didn't want to do it virtually. They wanted to see him face to face. But over the last 5-6 weeks, they've got so used to seeing him virtually that he never needs to travel again. And so it's been a massive benefit to him. Another friend of mine who I work with, who said, his suitcase has got dust on it for the first time in 20 years. So,
yes, not only. I just say my briefcase has also got dust on it, and documents which I thought were incredibly important, which I carried around with me all the time in it, have not seen the light of day for the last 8 weeks or whatever it is. So there's been all sorts of streamlining of activities, I think, and yes, I'll be interested to see how people like you, Martin, as a consultant to businesses, can sort of reset the dials to make sure that this new time we have now is used effectively. And as I say, I don't just mean productively. I mean, satisfying the soul where required. The other thing you mentioned in your talk was office and land use requirements, particularly in towns. Again, this is something I've been talking a lot about and thinking a lot about recently. And I'm quite glad I'm not an investor in a speculative office block in a city centre at the moment, because so many conversations I've been having with people just saying, yeah, well, we won't need all that space again. We won't need to have all the team in at one time. So I know hot desking can't be done at the moment because of using the same sort of facilities. But hopefully, you won't need to have the whole team huddled together in one city centre office, and the commuting and all the problems that causes to people. So it's really interesting to see how that's going to change things. And I think there's a huge benefit to Cornwall that we can work remotely, that the sort of constraints and the accusations levelled at places like Cornwall in the 20th century where, you're too far from markets and yet people are too far away and these sort of things, they become completely irrelevant. So there hopefully will be a levelling up, which government policy has perhaps failed to do, which this crisis will bring about. And going on from that, I'd like to talk a little bit about what you think town centres and city centres should be. If they're not going to be full of people commuting into offices, I was talking at the working party in Cornwall the other day about the construction industry, which is such a bellwether of an economy's success, that they have an important role to play in creating buildings in town centres, which in my opinion, people can either live in or run their crafts and what we might associate generically with rural workshops can be run from town centre premises. And I just wondered where your mind is going in terms of, if we're not going to need 25-storey office blocks for insurance companies, what town and city centres are going to emerge into over the next 20 years, perhaps?
I think that's a really important question, and it's a huge question, and I haven't got an answer to that, in the sense that I'm seeing around the country, town centres are changing anyway. I mean, from a retail point of view, all the retail's moving out, and retail's disappearing, in lots of places from the high street, with online shopping and retail parks and big places and so on. So city centres and town centres are changing dramatically anyway. Where I used to live in the northwest, market town, the market has just been completely levelled in the middle, and now they're building houses in it, and they're building accommodation in the centre. The main kind of retail centre has moved slightly out of the town. It's still there, but it's slightly different, and it's much more kind of leisure based and big cinema and all that kind of thing in there. So I think there has to be that kind of shift. Now, that's a small market town. It's a lot easier to do that than it is in a city that's full of 25-storey office blocks. So I don't know is the answer to that. I mean, one answer is to convert it into housing, but I'm not convinced that office buildings make brilliant housing blocks. So I don't know what the answer to that is overall. I think we are going to see a lot more kind of people walking around and having more leisure time during the day. They're working from home and they're taking breaks and so on and so on. The whole focus is going to shift in terms of what the traffic is like in a town.
And it'll be interesting to bring this discussion back to its topic of well-being and personal well-being, as to what those things solve and what problems they cause, isn't it? I mean, it's when you say walking round and less time in the car and less time in the office, those sound like hopefully good outcomes, but the lack of community cohesion, which is lost by not having a town centre and having a place where people go and socialise accidentally or deliberately with people in their own town and with whom they share a sort of local concern and geography and that sort of thing, could have more sort of isolation and loneliness type of problems if those the community hubs which we know as towns, and which you're talking about your town in the northwest. I live in Falmouth, where if you look up at the buildings in the main sort of shopping streets, they're beautifully built, architecturally interesting, built on the belief over the last 200 years that shopping, we were ever going to have a need for shopping. And if we're not going to do that, and clearly these few weeks of being distance have even made some of the things we thought we needed in the high street less appealing now, I would say. It'd be interesting to know what those buildings, because we can't just, in your town, you're saying that was knocked down, that market, but you can't knock down high streets. They're not like a child's toy that you've grown out of and can get rid of. So we are going to have to do something with them, and it'll be really interesting to see what happens. But also, I think it's important in places like Cornwall that we don't just sit back and see what happens, but actually take some policies and planning to guide what happens. Our towns are very important to us.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that you're absolutely right, because levelling sort of Falmouth High Street or the centre of Truro would be a horrible thing to do, because they're such interesting places to be. I think that the retail, there needs to be retail in city centres. There needs to be the reason for people going into city centres, town centres. One of the biggest problems is we keep coming back to the business rates issue and the cost of renting a shop in a town. And again, lots of places I visit, they've got so many empty stores in the centre of the town, and if what stores there are tend to be charity shops because they get a good deal on the rate and on the rent and the rates and so on. But I think that there is scope for pop-up shops, for multi-use shops, with groups of people, co-ops getting together and selling, so although there's a lot of people are selling their stuff online, and we've got all the rural workshops and things who are selling stuff online, I think it'd be great if we could encourage them into town centres, because that, even just walking around those sort of places and watching, looking at artisans at work, people making things that are then selling them in the same space, is kind of an interest in itself. So I think it's not enough just to put coffee shops and restaurants and bars and things in a town, and I'm really worried about what's going to happen to all of that social side of things after this, with the problems that are happening with pubs and restaurants and cafes and so on. But that's sort of, there needs to be somewhere that people want to go to socialise, as well as to go and buy things. And one of the big problems, I think, at the moment with this lockdown is the fact that people are getting so used to buying things online now that they're not going out anyway, but whether that'll become more of a habit. The number of people who never shopped online or did a click and collect, who are now, I'm talking to people who are going, actually, this is really easy. Apart from my dad, who really struggles with it, but everybody else is kind of buying things and getting delivered.
Yeah, I think that's things that even 3 months ago we wouldn't have bothered to buy online. We're now doing so. So I think retail's going to have to again reinvent itself. So I don't know whether, Naomi, there are any other questions which will come in during our chat, but just while you have a look through those, productivity is a thing which Cornwall is notoriously bad on. Just to remind people of the stats on that, the UK is 6th or 7th lowest in productivity out of the G7 countries, but against the UK index 100, Cornwall comes out at, or last time it was measured, came out at 72, which I believe there's a massive debate for another day around whether we're measuring the right things in the 21st century. But inevitably, it does have some impact on keeping wages low, and then if wages are low, there's the knock-on effect of employers not being able to afford to train their people and keep them all year round, and all those sort of things. Does what we're going through at the moment, Martin, have is there a measurable, or is there just a psychological boost or a negative impact, if you might say, on productivity? You covered it briefly in the sort of 3 hours a day stat from office workers generally. I've always felt that in a service economy-led place like Cornwall, to value the widgets produced per person per hour was not a very good measure. It didn't take impact on health, well-being in the workplace, for example. It didn't take account of lifetime productivity or low staff turnover, these sort of things. Perhaps there's an opportunity again to reset the buttons at the moment, and will that favour Cornwall? Will it enable it itself for us to not remain at 17% lower than the national average when it comes to wages, for example? What are the chances? What are the impacts here, and what might employers do to lead a revolution around that, if we can?
That's a really big question from the Cornish economy. I mean, we are so, as you say, we're so service-led, we're so tourism-based, that it's really hard to measure productivity in the kind of traditional sense, I think. And in terms of wages, it's all about how valued people are, I think. And if we value what people do, we pay them more. I know there are some sectors in Cornwall that are well paid, and most of those are the ones who can work remotely. So we value what people are doing. The fact that they're in Cornwall is kind of irrelevant, but they're here for lifestyle and well-being, and so supporting those people becomes really important, and attracting people. And I guess traditionally, I say traditionally because it's really new, that's been the tech sector, because working remotely doesn't make any difference. But I think we're starting to see the opportunity to work remotely in lots of different industries. So, even in things like customer service, and we can work more remotely than perhaps we've done in the past. And there needs to be and innovation and people in that sort of those sort of organizations who are being innovative and trying to find ways of working remotely and being more productive a long way away from their market even. It needs to be attractive in Cornwall to bring people down here. And obviously it's attractive in terms of lifestyle and the environment and where we are and what happens and the vibrant kind of social stuff and all the rest of it, and the arts and things down here. I think that's really important, but it needs to be attractive in terms of wages as well. But there's no reason why, if people can work remotely, and that's going to happen. And just to pick up on the training point and about how companies are finding it maybe difficult to train people because of cost and so on, I think you're going to see a drop in the price of training because most training is going to be online from now on, at least in the short term, and I suspect in the long term as well. And that's going to mean that people will reduce the costs of training. I know that's what I'm looking at the moment already, because the whole model is going to have to change into shorter bursts. So the idea of full day training in a classroom, I think, is going to disappear. And so trying to do a full day's training in front of a laptop isn't going to work. So we've got to find a different way of developing that. And we're working on ideas around that at the moment. But it also opens up that market to all over the world. I mean, the webinar I ran on resilience a couple of weeks ago, I had 100 people on it, most of whom were from India and Saudi Arabia and the Philippines. There were quite a lot, probably about 50% from the UK, but the rest were, and I didn't even know who they were. I had no idea how they contacted it. So I think that there's an opportunity to shift it that way. So I think that, you know, the big training providers will need to kind of think about how they're going to provide training in this new environment, because it's going to be very different. I think education is going to change, or it should do, and higher education and so on.
Really interesting, and I think it's just such an interesting time in many ways. And as I said at the beginning, I don't want to play down the pain that many small business owners in Cornwall and elsewhere are feeling at the moment. But I do think there are some interesting things to talk about, what it will feel like, you know, during the recovery and afterwards, and what we can learn from this period that we might apply usefully going forward. So. Well, Martin, is there anything like that you'd like to add? Anything that we haven't covered that you'd like to particularly make a point of?
I think we were talking about resilience right at the start, and you were asking about tips for resilience. And I think individual resilience and organisational resilience all kind of come into the same thing. And for me, there's kind of 10 key elements in that. One's about relationships, and it's about creating and maintaining relationships. So internally and externally. So from an organizational point of view, from a leadership point of view, it's about understanding the team that you work, that work for you and work with you, and maintaining that. And acceptance of change, because, you know, we've always said this thing, you know, the only constant thing is change, and nobody really imagined there'd be such a massive change in such a short time. But we need to accept change and not necessarily welcome it, but not be afraid of it, but accept it. We need to focus on goals. Be very clear about outcome rather than presenteeism in a workplace, but get much more focused on goals. And we need to do what we've done and what you were talking about earlier in terms of government and local councils and things, is we need to take decisive actions. We need to make decisions and take those actions, because I always say that a ship can't change direction unless it's moving. So unless we take an action, we can't change that action. If we just sit still, it's not going to work. We need to look for learning opportunities. So what can we learn from this situation? So rather than see it as being an insurmountable problem, but what can we learn from it? We need to keep things in perspective. And as you were quite rightly saying earlier, Kim, you know, we need to not forget the businesses who are really, really struggling in this. I mean, we're struggling, but I know there's a lot of people who are in a lot worse state than we are. I know pub owners who are in real problems at the moment. And I think we also need to maintain a hopeful outlook. So we need to think about it in terms of, you know, what can we do? What are we going to do? It will, you know, this too will pass. And what's going to come out of the other end of it? And what opportunities can we take from it? And I think most importantly, you need to take care of yourself. So we need that downtime. And Kim, yeah, it might feel great at the end of the day, and the oxytocin levels are high because you've nailed your to-do list, and you've made a lot of good things to do. But that's not sustainable over a long period of time. And I think for me, if I can do 3 hours of really good work in a day, and the rest of the time I've taken the dog for a walk, I've read something, I've had a coffee, I've spoken to my dad, those sort of things. I think, and I definitely did do the go into the office, work till I go home again, maybe get some lunch. And I'm thinking about a fundamental change in the way that I work, as well as the way that lots of other people work. So for me, that's basically just modeling people who are naturally resilient. These are the sort of things that they do and the sort of things that they think about. So let's be resilient.
Very upbeat note to end on. Thank you very much indeed. So, Martin, that's been a really fascinating, nearly an hour, actually, a really good conversation. I hope some stuff there which will be of use to people running their businesses in Cornwall and beyond, really. I think, some really interesting lessons, and I think you have highlighted a few of the angles which are really going to be needed to be looked at very carefully for businesses going forward. And I think, if we can be upbeat and look at what the lessons to be learned here are, then, it could be good for Cornwall, it could be good for small businesses, it could be good for business practices. And finally, the topic of this discussion, it could be good for people's individual resilience, mental well-being as well. So I think there's lots to hang on to in these rather troubling times, which I hope will reset people's dials going forward in business, and we can learn from. And I know you're available to have further follow-up conversations, whether in depth with clients or some introductory level at that. And from a Cornwall Chamber of Commerce point of view, we've got plenty of online events, 3 most weeks, either in conjunction with our members and experts like with Martin this morning, or things that we're offering from the Chamber of Commerce, which, as I say, I'm taking some hope in that we're delivering something for business. So we're always here for you. Martin from his point of view, Chamber of Commerce from a sort of collective point of view. So once again, Martin, thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. It's been really insightful and interesting, and actually really enjoyable as well, to discuss some of those big issues which we don't get time for in the hurly-burly of the office days sometimes. So thank you very much indeed.